So, Sabrina Carpenter's latest album cover has been released, and oh boy, nothing says artistic irony like a young woman on her knees, hair pulled by a man. While Carpenter hasn't explicitly used the word irony, The Guardian describes the cover as clearly working in the Madonna tradition of sexual provocation for provocation's sake, poking fun at tropes and people's prudishness with an alluring frankness. Cue the internet's moral panic and praise parade, because of course this kind of imagery sits at a messy intersection of empowerment, objectification, and good old-fashioned misogyny. On the one side, you have her defenders. It's her body, her choice. The rallying cry of sex-positive feminism, which emerged prominently during the third wave and emphasises bodily autonomy and sexual self-expression as acts of resistance against patriarchal shame. For these critics, Carpenter's album cover isn't a problem, it's a power move. A reclamation, a moment of sexual authorship in a landscape that still tries to script femininity in palatable and controllable ways. On the other side are those that warn that this isn't just a personal aesthetic choice. It's a move in a broader cultural chess game where female sexuality is commodified and constrained by patriarchy. Drawing on the work of theorists such as Andrea Dworkin and Ray Langton, these critics argue that agency under capitalism and patriarchy is rarely pure. It's often shaped by the very structures it claims to resist. To paraphrase Martha Nussbaum, the issue isn't just about what is chosen, but how social systems can reduce women to tools or bodies shaping desire to mirror power. And somewhere in the middle of all this, it's me, because I am a fence sitter. I am squinting at these screens thinking, can we just stop pretending that this is a simple either or? Because Carpenter isn't single-handedly rolling us back or setting feminism ablaze, but neither is she exactly liberating us from sexist norms with this stunt. She's part of a broader cultural aesthetic alongside hyperfeminine figures like Bonnie Blue and Lily Phillips that collectively broadcast a narrow, algorithmically boosted image of online womanhood. Petite, soft, sexually suggestive, and always highly curated. Rosalind Gill describes this as post-feminist sensibility, an aesthetic and cultural framework in which empowerment is tethered to hypervisibility, self-discipline, and sexual availability, all under the guise of free choice. And when these critiques get tangled up with puritanical conservatism, which, let's be honest, is enjoying a minor Gen Z rebrand with, trad wife content and domestic cosplay from the 1950s, then it's no wonder that this conversation becomes so heated, confusing, and frankly, exhausting. As Angela McRobbie warns, critiques of hypersexuality can easily get hijacked by post-feminist backlash, reinforcing patriarchal norms under the notion of protection or values, especially when they rely on simplistic binaries of good versus bad femininity. In this video, I'm gonna try to wade through the mess, honouring the fierce right to sexual self-expression whilst unpacking the ways that these choices operate within a media and economic system that exploits, amplifies, and limits them. It's a reminder that feminist critique doesn't have to be a culture war. We've got enough infighting, guys. Can we just call it, please? It can be a careful, compassionate, context-sensitive conversation about freedom, power, and the impossible balancing act women are expected to perform. Because irony or not, this cover is a cultural Rorschach test, and we're all still trying to figure out what that really means. Third wave feminism and sex-positive feminism have long championed the idea that women's sexual self-expression is a form of empowerment. Scholars like Gill argue that the ability to control one's image and sexuality can resist traditional shame and patriarchal control. In Gender and Media, Gill describes this as part of a post-feminist sensibility, where empowerment is linked to choice, visibility, and sexual agency. Jessica Valenti echoes this in Sex Object, suggesting that owning one's sexuality publicly can subvert earlier feminist critiques that painted all sexualization as inherently oppressive. Natasha Walters' Living Dolls similarly defends women's rights to sexual freedom, arguing that female sexual expression challenges prudish and puritanical norms, breaking free from restrictive respectability politics. Framing Sabrina's album cover as ironic fits within this defense. She is owning the imagery of submission and sexualization on her own terms, challenging the idea that such representations must always be disempowering or shameful. From this perspective, her image is a deliberate, empowered performance that complicates easy assumptions about victimhood or passivity. However, these choices do not exist within a vacuum. Feminist philosophers like Martha Nussbaum offer sharp critiques of objectification, defining it as the treatment of a person as a mere instrument or commodity. Nussbaum's framework identifies components of objectification, such as denial of autonomy and reduction to body parts, concepts highly relevant when discussing sexualized imagery in mass media. Andrea Dworkin's radical feminist critique in pornography, Men Possessing Women, provides a more systemic analysis, arguing that such sexualized images are not just personal choices, but part of a wider culture of misogyny that normalizes male dominance and female submission. This framework helps explain why imagery like Carpenter's, with the, visual evocation of hair pulling and kneeling, can unintentionally perpetuate harmful norms of control and fetishization, especially when paired with its insistence on her petite frame, echoing Lolita-like fetishization of youth and vulnerability. The problem is not just the image itself, but how it circulates within a media landscape that routinely sexualizes and commodifies women in reductive ways. Feminist theories warn that when sexual agency is framed narrowly within patriarchal scripts, where submission is eroticized or youth is fetishized, then it can reinforce inequality rather than subvert it. And we've looked at both perspectives, and both have critical insights, but also they both have limitations. The sex-positive defense can sometimes downplay the structural forces that shape choice, while the objectification critique risks veering into moralistic puritanism or denying women their agency entirely. In the case of Carpenter, her ironic, sexualized imagery is both a site of empowerment and complicity, a reminder that agency can coexist with constraint, and that feminist critique must navigate this tension carefully. Recognizing this complexity is key to moving beyond simplistic debate of empowered versus oppressed, and towards a deeper understanding of how power, representation, and choice all intertwine. Having looked at the major arguments surrounding this album cover, let's dive in a bit deeper. Now, the album cover itself doesn't exist in isolation. It's part of a broader constellation of mainstream female figures like Bonnie Blue and Lily Phillips, whose public personas collectively shape how women's sexuality is perceived and consumed in popular culture today, especially online. These women, whether they're intending to or not, become templates for femininity, with their images circulating widely across social media, music, fashion, and this influences what counts as desirable, sexy, and acceptable for women, especially young women. Rosalind Gill's concept of post-feminist sensibility offers a crucial lens here. In post-feminist media culture, Elements of Sensibility, Gill describes post-feminism as a cultural climate where feminists' gains are assumed to have been achieved, leaving women to negotiate their empowerment individually, often through self-sexualized presentation and consumption. This focus on personal choice and self-branding tends to obscure the ongoing structural inequalities that women still continue to face, such as persistent sexism, gendered labour divisions, and media objectification. The elevation of certain types of femininity, like Carpenter's youthful, petite, hypersexualized aesthetic, or Bonnie Blue's similarly fetishized image, means that these representations start to function as stand-ins for womanhood itself in the digital age. When the dominant culture promotes a narrow set of ideals around sexual attractiveness and female empowerment, it narrows the scope of acceptable female sexuality, sidelining other forms of expression that might not fit the glossy mold. An example of this sidelining is the original backlash that Lola Young received after she released One Thing. For more on that, check out a previous video of mine. This creates new pressures. Women are encouraged not only to be sexual sexually visible, but to conform to specific aesthetics and behaviours that can perpetuate internalized misogyny and self-policing. As Gill argues, this leads to a paradox where freedom and empowerment coexist uneasily with conformity and exploitation. Thus, while defending women's freedom to make choices is vital, it's equally important to recognise how mainstream media and cultural industry shape and limit those choices, often without women fully realising the extent of these constraints. Carpenter and her contemporaries are navigating a landscape where sexual agency is marketed and managed, and the cultural visibility they gain comes with power and responsibility, whether they want it or not. But critiquing images like Sabrina Carpenter's provocative album cover is a tightrope walk. On one hand, there is a genuine need to unpack how such imagery can reinforce harmful stereotypes and perpetuate systemic misogyny. On the other, there's the very real risk of these critiques being dismissed, or worse, weaponised, by conservative and puritanical voices who use feminist language as a cover for moral panic and policing women's bodies. Cultural theorist Angela McRobbie's work on post-feminist backlash offers a key insight into this dynamic. In the aftermath of feminism, McRobbie argues that whilst feminism seems culturally victorious, a neoliberal ideology of individual responsibility and choice masks ongoing structural inequalities. This depoliticizes critique, reducing feminist analysis to a matter of personal preference rather than systemic challenge. As a result, women's sexual expression is both hypervisual and heavily scrutinised, leaving little space for critical yet empathetic dialogue. This neoliberal framing of feminism, with emphasis on personal empowerment and choice, is further elaborated on by Rosalind Gill, who notes how it can obscure the broader systemic issues by focusing discourse on individual lifestyle and aesthetics rather than collective structures of power. It's the idea that choice in itself is empowering. The right to choose is a feminist one, but that does not mean that the choice in itself is feminist. That empowerment is empowering on a personal level, not on a structural one, not on a mass one, and definitely not on a feminist one. Meanwhile, the recent conservative turn among some Gen Z communities, evidenced by the resurgence of tradwife movements and skepticism towards hypersexual pop culture, is often framed as a rejection of perceived excess and moral decline. Sociologists such as Catherine Gelber and Jessie Daniels analyse this phenomenon as a backlash to the contradictions and pressures of neoliberal post-feminism. For many, embracing traditional gender roles may represent fatigue with the impossible standards of choice and empowerment imposed by a system that demands women perform simultaneously as autonomous agents and hypersexualized subjects. Yet this reaction is not a straightforward solution. It risks aligning with restrictive gender norms and erasing the complexities of feminist sexual agency. Conservative turn of the youth often entwines with puritanical policing of bodies, which feminist theorists like Bell Hooks and Sarah Ahmed caution against. These scholars warn that critique veering towards moralism or judgment risks reinforcing the very oppressive norms they seek to challenge. Thus, feminist critiques of sexualized imagery must navigate these cultural dynamics carefully to avoid reinforcing puritanical policing, while still honestly confronting how certain images do perpetuate misogyny. Such critique should resist simplistic moral judgment or cultural gatekeeping, instead focusing on critical awareness that recognises both structural constraints and individual agency. Empowerment and oppression are often entangled in complex and contradictory ways. We must demand a feminist analysis nuanced enough to hold these tensions simultaneously. Now, whilst I personally disagree with the notion of OnlyFans and sex work, and I don't really agree with Sabrina Carpenter's imagery, it is essential to recognise that figures like Sabrina Carpenter, Bonnie Blue, Lily Phillips, and others exercise genuine agency and possess the right to self-expression. From a feminist standpoint rooted in autonomy and sexual freedom, their ability to control how they present themselves publicly should be respected and defended. After all, Policing women's bodies and choices risks sliding into the very patriarchal moralism feminism seeks to dismantle. However, on the flip side, agency is never absolute or unconstrained. Feminist scholars such as Patricia Hill Collins remind us that individual choices are always embedded within broader systems, such as the patriarchy, capitalism, the media's commodification of female bodies, and that significantly limits the scope of real freedom. Carpenter's provocative imagery doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's a part of a cultural ecosystem that shapes and sometimes distorts how women are seen and valued. Crucially, Carpenter's work and decisions do not set women back or negate feminist progress, but it does participate in and reinforce a mainstream media environment that often reduces femininity to narrow, hypersexualized scripts, privileging certain aesthetics and performances while marginalising others. The cultural recognition and visibility that these women gain come with the weight of broader societal expectations and stereotypes, which can harm collective perceptions of womanhood. Therefore, feminist critique must shift focus away from blaming individuals and towards systemic issues and media literacy. Rather than moralising over good versus bad sexual expression, we should interrogate how media industries, advertising, and digital culture promote restrictive ideals and commodify female bodies for profit and consumption. A truly feminist approach embraces complexity and nuance, regardless of whether that makes me look like a fence sitter or not. It rejects the binary of pure empowerment versus pure victimhood and instead acknowledges that women's sexual agency and structural oppression coexist in tension. By situating these debates within their cultural context, we open space for more honest, critical conversations, ones that honour freedom while recognising the persistent challenges women face in negotiating power, representation, and identity. The conversation surrounding Sabrina Carpenter's album cover and similar expressions of female sexuality in mainstream culture reveals a constellation of complex tensions. On the one hand, there is the vital recognition of women's sexual agency and freedom of expression, and on the other, the undeniable reality that such agency is always shaped and sometimes constrained by patriarchal capitalist medium systems that commodify and objectify women. This video has sought to honour both sides of that debate, defending the right of women to own and perform their sexuality whilst critically interrogating the broader cultural context that shape these performances and their social meanings. It is neither productive nor fair to place blame on individual artists alone for systemic issues, but neither can these representations be uncritically accepted as purely empowering. Moving forward, feminist conversations about sexual agency and representation must be nuanced, context-aware, and resistant to simplistic binaries. We must challenge media industries to diversify and expand the ways women are portrayed, foster critical media literacy that equips audiences to recognise and question harmful norms, and engage in feminist discourse that respects individual choices whilst addressing structural harm. Only through such balanced, reflective dialogue can feminism continue to evolve, celebrating freedom without losing sight of the ongoing struggles for genuine equality and respect. But that's just my fence-sitting opinion. I can see the arguments on both sides, and I find myself agreeing and disagreeing with them in equal measure. Often when I'm replying to comments from you guys, this comes through. Just because I'm arguing one argument or portraying one point of view, it doesn't mean I totally 100% agree with it. Often a lot of my personal opinions sit neatly in the middle. But let me know what you guys think and if I truly am just a fence sitter. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a comment or a like and subscribe if you're new. And with that, I'll see you soon.